On the morning of June 10th, 1942, the men of a quiet Czech village were lined up against a barn wall and shot to one after another until 173 bodies lay in the dirt. Their wives were loaded onto trucks bound for concentration camps. Their children, 88 of them, were gassed in sealed vans, never to come home. The man who ordered all of it didn't just escape punishment for years. He climbed higher. He got promoted. He was given more power and more victims. His name was Karl Hermann Frank. And this is the story of how the most hated man in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia finally met the justice he spent years evading in front of 5,000 people who wanted to watch him die. If you're new to war heroes, this channel exists to make sure the world never forgets what happened. Hit subscribe right now, turn on the bell, and stay until the end. This story will shake you. January 24th, 1898. A boy is born in Carlsbad, a spa town tucked into the rolling hills of Bohemia, what is now the Czech city of Karlovy Vary. His name is Karl Hermann Frank. His father, Heinrich, is a school teacher, but not just any school teacher. He is a fiery German nationalist who raises his son on a steady diet of racial pride, ethnic grievance, and the belief that Germans are superior to the Slavic people around them. By the time Karl is a teenager, that poison is already deep in his bones. Then comes the accident. Karl is about 9 or 10 years old when a rock hits him directly in the right eye during a childhood game. The injury destroys his vision in that eye permanently, and years later, doctors have no choice but to remove it entirely and replace it with a glass one. It's a detail that seems almost too symbolic. A man who would go on to blind and destroy so many others, himself partially blinded as a child. When World War I erupts in 1914, 16-year-old Frank desperately tries to enlist in the Austro-Hungarian army. He's rejected because of his ruined eye. That humiliation doesn't soften him. It hardens him. He spends the war years watching from the sidelines, his resentment festering. Then comes 1918, and with it, the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A new country is born, Czechoslovakia. Czechs make up 50% of the population, Germans around 22%, Slovaks 16%. Frank, as a Sudeten German, an ethnic German living inside the new Czech state, feels cheated, displaced, and furious. He joins the German National Socialist Workers' Party in 1919, a proto-fascist organization years before Hitler's version would make the world tremble. In 1925, he opens a bookstore in Carlsbad, not selling novels or poetry, but specializing exclusively in National Socialist literature. He isn't just a follower. He is a true believer, building a movement one pamphlet at a time. When Adolf Hitler seizes power in Germany in 1933, Karl Hermann Frank sees his moment. He throws himself into the Sudeten German political movement, helping Konrad Henlein build the Sudeten German Party into one of the largest fascist organizations in Europe, over 1.3 million members by 1938, representing 40% of ethnic Germans in Czechoslovakia. Then Munich happens. September 1938, Britain and France, desperate to avoid another world war, would hand Hitler the Sudetenland on a silver platter, without even inviting Czechoslovakia to the conference. The Czechs call it a betrayal. Frank calls it a triumph. He is appointed Deputy Gauleiter, regional Nazi Party leader, of the newly annexed Sudetenland. On November 1st, 1938, he formally joins the Nazi Party and the SS. By March 15th, 1939, Hitler breaks his promise and invades the rest of Czechoslovakia, establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Frank is promoted to SS Gruppenführer, equivalent to Major General, and named Secretary of State under Reich Protector Konstantin von Neurath. He also becomes the Protectorate's higher SS and police leader, giving him direct command over the Gestapo, the SD Intelligence Service, and the criminal police force known as the Kripo. In plain terms, Frank now controls every instrument of terror in the country. He wastes no time using them. More than 118,000 Jews living in the Protectorate have their bank accounts frozen, their businesses seized, their property confiscated. The total value stripped from Jewish families estimated at the equivalent of 11 billion US dollars today. These aren't abstract numbers. These are families, doctors, teachers, shopkeepers, children, erased from society by paperwork signed with Frank's authority. By 1941, Hitler grows impatient. He considers von Neurath too soft on the Czechs. On September 23, 1941, he strips von Neurath of real power and appoints Reinhard Heydrich, the architect of the Holocaust, as acting Reich protector. Heydrich arrives in Prague and immediately tells his staff, "We will Germanize the Czech vermin." Frank and Heydrich are an ugly match. Two ruthless, ambitious men who initially clash over turf, but quickly find common ground in cruelty. Together, they launch a wave of arrests and executions across the Protectorate. By February 1942, Heydrich himself estimates that between 4,000 and 5,000 people have been arrested and 400 to 500 executed. In October 1941, systematic deportations of Czech Jews begin, the first transports heading to the Łódź ghetto in occupied Poland. Of the first 5,000 Jews deported to Łódź, only 277 survive. That's a survival rate of barely 5%. Heydrich also establishes the Theresienstadt ghetto in the fortress town of Terezín, creating what the Nazis will cynically market to the world as a model Jewish settlement while using it as a transit point to the death camps. May 27, 1942. Two Czechoslovak paratroopers, Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš, trained in Britain and dropped behind enemy lines, ambush Heydrich's open-top Mercedes in Prague. Heydrich is wounded. Though he initially appears to be recovering, sitting up to eat on June 3rd, he collapses hours later and dies the next day from septic infection caused by shrapnel and upholstery fragments from the blast. The Nazi regime erupts. Karl Hermann Frank immediately declares a state of emergency and imposes a curfew across Prague. He announces that anyone who sheltered the attackers will be executed, along with their entire family. A manhunt involving 21,000 soldiers sweeps 36,000 houses. By June 4th, 157 people have already been executed, and the assassins still haven't been found. Then comes Hitler's direct command, transmitted through Frank on June 9th, the day of Heydrich's state funeral in Berlin. The order is precise and merciless. Execute all men in any village found to have harbored the assassins. Send all women to concentration camps. Children suitable for Germanization go to SS families in the Reich. The rest of the children, deal with them in other ways. Burn the village. Level it to the ground. The village chosen was Lidice. The connection was flimsy at best, a name mentioned in a love letter discovered during the investigation, linking a Lidice resident to a man working in a British munitions factory. There was no real evidence. No proven connection to the assassins. It didn't matter. On the morning of June 10th, 1942, Karl Hermann Frank himself drove to Lidice to personally oversee what was about to happen. Witnesses later reported that he appeared satisfied with what he saw. All 173 men and boys aged 15 and older were shot against a barn wall and buried in a mass grave. The 184 women were sent to the Ravensbrück concentration camp. Of the 105 children, 88 were murdered, gassed in sealed vans at the Chomno extermination camp. Only 17 children survived the war, selected because they were deemed racially suitable for Germanization and handed to German SS families under new names, new identities, their pasts erased. 4 pregnant women from Lidice were forced to undergo abortions in the same Prague hospital where Heydrich had died. The village was burned, the ruins were bulldozed, the cemetery was dug up. Even the river was rerouted so that nothing of Lidice would remain above the soil. 2 weeks later, the small village of Ležáky was destroyed when Gestapo agents found a hidden radio transmitter there. All 33 adults were shot. The children were sent to camps. In total, the campaign to avenge Heydrich's death killed an estimated 1,331 people, including relatives of partisans, Czech elites suspected of resistance, and dozens of innocent civilians who simply lived in the wrong place. The massacre of Lidice triggered international outrage. Across Britain and the United States, towns and villages renamed themselves Lidice in solidarity. The name became a symbol of Nazi barbarism that the entire world could not ignore. Frank continued to climb through the war years. In June 1943, he was promoted to SS Obergruppenführer, the equivalent of lieutenant general. In August 1943, he was made Minister of State for Bohemia and Moravia. The Czechs had a name for him. They called him Bloody Dog Frank. In 1944, Frank personally directed anti-partisan operations in Moravia, deploying 13,000 soldiers to destroy the Jan Žižka partisan brigade, the largest resistance unit in the protectorate. He ordered the public hanging of suspected partisans for 48 hours, so their bodies could be seen as a warning. Despite everything, the partisan brigade survived until the war's end. By April 1945, Frank could read the writing on the wall. The Reich was collapsing. He fled Prague and surrendered to the U.S. Army near the town of Roky Kani on May 9, 1945, deliberately choosing Americans over Soviets, terrified of what the Red Army would do to him. His plan was to use the Americans as a shield. It didn't work. American investigators discovered something extraordinary, a secret archive of Frank's documents hidden in a mine near the Czech village of Stekovec. Hundreds of orders for executions, arrests, and deportations, all bearing Frank's personal, handwritten signature. Every lie he planned to tell at trial was already buried in the earth, waiting to be found. He was extradited back to Prague. The People's Court convened from March to May 1946. Not a single attorney would agree to defend him, until a lawyer named Kamil Ressler stepped forward, earning the nickname, the Devil's Advocate. Ressler defended Frank with professional integrity, despite knowing the verdict was never in doubt. Frank stood before the court and claimed he wasn't guilty, only co-responsible. He said he had followed orders. He was just one small part of the Nazi machine. But then, in an extraordinary moment, he admitted that the executions could be regarded according to human feelings and human laws as a murder. He knew what he had done. He just didn't believe he should die for it. He was wrong. On May 21, 1946, the People's Court of Prague sentenced Karl Hermann Frank to death by hanging, for treason, and for the massacre of the civilians of Lidice and Ležáky. Desperate, Frank sent a personal telegram to Czechoslovak President Edvard Beneš, writing, "I believe that as a victor you will show mercy and grant me life." There was no reply. May 22, 1946, Pankrak Prison, Prague. More than 5,000 people packed the prison courtyard to watch. In the front row sit 7 surviving women from Lidice, women who had lost their husbands, their children, their entire world to this man's orders. At 1:37 p.m., Karl Hermann Frank, 48 years old, is brought out. He is lifted by a sling to the top of a hanging pole and dropped approximately 1 meter. The pole hanging method is deliberately slower than a standard drop. He does not go quickly. His final words, shouted to the crowd watching him die, were, "Germany must live even if we die. Long live the German nation. Long live the German spirit." An avowed Nazi to his last breath. A condemned man executed this way typically hangs for 30 minutes. Frank hung for 45 minutes. No one in that courtyard was in any hurry. When he was buried afterward in an unmarked pit at Dablice Cemetery, the same cemetery where the bodies of his victims, Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš, the men who killed Heydrich, had been secretly buried years before. In death, the hunter and his prey shared the same ground. His second wife, Karola, was arrested by Soviet forces, sent to a labor camp in Kazakhstan's Gulag, and spent 10 years in forced labor. Released in 1955, she moved to West Germany and spent 4 years searching for her 3 children, who had been raised under new names in new families with no memory of who they once were. No one shed a tear for Karl Hermann Frank. History doesn't forget, and neither do we. The story of Karl Hermann Frank is a reminder that power built on terror is always borrowed time. The women of Lidice who sat in that front row on May 22, 1946, they had endured the worst thing a human being can endure, and they showed up anyway, not for revenge, for justice. That distinction matters. This is War Heroes, where we tell the stories history owes the world. If this video moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to War Heroes so you never miss an episode.